As the host of Neutralize, the Mama Trauma podcast, I am delighted to be able to bring you this podcast. My name is Wendy Lopez, and I would like to introduce myself to you. I specialize in helping people overcome their emotional blocks through different techniques, through emotional empowerment coaching and compassionate healing light facilitation. As a mom who has experienced narcissistic trauma, I help moms eradicate self-doubt in order to regain self-confidence to elevate their status both at home and at work. In our podcast, we discuss people's struggles, triumphs, and failures. We dive deeper into self-love, self-compassion, self-acceptance, and mindful, holistic tips. In every episode, I hope that you can take a golden nugget of advice and apply it to the journey of motherhood in order to raise your level of awareness. Welcome to Neutralize the Mama Trauma podcast, where you find healing and creative mental thought advice from experts on past pain, narcissistic experiences, and trauma. Today, I have a special guest. His name is JP Marsh. He's a 40-year-old girl dad to an 8-year-old, split up with her mother 6 years ago, and has gone from conflict to collaboration and having a healthy co-parenting relationship. So welcome, JP. I'm so happy to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes. And like I said, you're like my first male guest. So I'm excited to have a perspective on male, even you do coaching and you do your own personal life. So I'm happy to have a male perspective on the show. So before we, started talking, you can quickly introduce yourself and then we'll jump into what we were talking about.
Perfect. Well, I'm honored to be the first male. Thank you. Yeah, I am your normal sort of guy. I do construction in my day job and I do some co-parenting coaching on the side. The coaching thing is sort of something I grew up in. I grew up in an AA environment with the sponsors and that kind of stuff from my dad, stopped drinking when I was a young child. And so it kind of felt natural to sort of help people that are 3 to 5 years behind you. And I've been sort of doing the podcast guesting and talking about the benefits and speaking about the perks and the easier way of life it is when you can collaborate with your child's other parent, whether you're still in the relationship or you're divorced. If you can,
yes, absolutely,
the better you can get along, the better it is for everybody. So
right. Yes. And that's why I'm so happy to have you on board, because as we were talking prior to hitting record, we talked about traumas, emotional immaturity, and you said something that really, resonated with me. And it's when someone is not willing to look at themselves or look at their traumas and not wanting to communicate at any level, you really can't go past that, right? Because the person is not ready to be mature about their situation. And so we know when, there's kids involved, whether it's through marriage or just partnership, and there's that split, it can cause a very unhealthy environment for the children. But you said something that I wanted you to elaborate on, is that if you can't get your emotional baggage aside and you can't figure it out, then the person is the problem, right? Whoever is creating that. So can you, with your expertise, talk more on that? Because I want to bring that to light, that I don't think people realize, like, I'm the problem. That is what and then it's important because we're talking about co-parenting.
Right. And it goes for a lot of aspects of life, but, in the realms that I run in, the people that I talk to and sort of work with a lot, it has more to do with the co-parenting than maybe an office setting or a childhood traumas and stuff like that, but it's all relatable. And it's one of the biggest things and one of the first things that I try to get people to get to understand, and sort of the first barrier to try to work through is, I like to call it, you got to get up and leave your own pity party and deal with letting the relationship go, grieve the relationship, quit. If you're dragging around the shame or anger, resentment, betrayal, hurt feelings, any of that kind of stuff, if you're dragging that around, odds are you're either adding to the problem or you are the problem. Whether you're instigating it or you're just throwing fire or gas on the fire, it doesn't really make a difference, because you're either the problem or part of the problem. So until you can sort of get out of that mind frame or outlook or state of being, that reality, to where you feel like the victim, or you're going to make them hurt as much as they may have hurt you, you're spending a lot of the time and energy and effort into something that really doesn't matter. You know what I mean? And sure, in most cases, one person has probably left the relationship a lot sooner than the other person. One person's usually checked out of the relationship. So
that's true.
More times than not, it's usually the one that got blindsided by the divorce or the breakup. You know what I mean? And the one that's having a harder time moving on, and the one that feels hurt, but it may not even be something necessarily that the other person did. If you've been programmed your whole life that it's shameful to have a failed marriage, or divorce is wrong, or you failed because you are not able to stay together for the kids, or whatever programming you have, if you can't let the relationship just end, grieve it, it's gone, it's not coming back.
Right.
The other person may have done something that you didn't like towards you, but maybe they're a good parent. And so them being a parent, your hurt feelings shouldn't stop them from being a good parent to their kids, or having time with their children, you know what I mean? Or anything like that. And so, it's hard, but it's hard. It's hard to take a look in the mirror and be like, am I the problem? Am I the one triggering and pushing buttons and doing these things that I know is going to trigger them? And or maybe you're engaging with your triggers and you're not identifying your triggers, and you're not shutting them down instead of engaging.
I like that.
You know what I mean?
Talk about more about how, because a lot of the awareness that the podcast brings is usually moms, or whoever's listening doesn't realize it. How would someone identify or realize that they're engaging with their triggers, but they don't know that they're engaging with their triggers? I mean, what can they look for themselves? Like, how can they look out for themselves?
Right. Well, I mean, I think to a certain, on a certain level, everybody sort of knows, especially in a relationship sort of environment, even in work relationships, family relationships, which uncle is going to push your buttons at Christmas or Thanksgiving, and what cousins are always poking at you and picking at you, and what, I have an older brother, and I knew what would get him going, just like he knew my whole life what was going to get me going. And being aware of the situations where he was going to have the opportunity to do those things to me. I mean, to a certain level, I knew, if we went here, he would have the option to push my buttons, and then we would get in a fight, but, doing a lot of self-reflection and sort of looking at past scenarios, if you're in a newer co-parenting relationship, or even one that, maybe you guys have been apart for 5 years. If every time you're doing a drop off and pickup at the McDonald's parking lot, you get in a big old screaming match because one person, then, narrow it down and figure out what's going on. It's starting to set you off, and then you're starting to go back and forth, and then all of a sudden it's this huge explosion. And so, if it's it's not really hard if you go looking for it to figure out, what triggers are,
Right.
But at the same time, with that, with the triggers and the engaging, if you don't have clear boundaries and hold those boundaries, nobody else is going to know what your boundaries are either. And so, if you have a high conflict ex who knows how to push your buttons and is getting you riled up every time you're doing a pickup and drop off, don't engage. Say, these are my boundaries. You're not going to talk to me like that. That's not okay. You're not showing up at my house. It's not acceptable behavior. But don't engage.
Right.
Take the emotions out of it. Don't turn around and, a lot of times it's the poking back and forth, because the one person will do it and then the other person will turn around and say, well, last time you did, and then just start poking right back. And then, so boundaries is a big part of it too.
Right. And so with the co-parenting, what do you find would disengage those triggers for them? So they're not engaging. What's something that they can do to disengage if they are having, I like what you said, a high conflict ex? Because that happens. It is so common.
Yeah. I mean, I found through trial and error in my co-parenting journey, the less that I reacted, the less that she was looking for a reaction. And so the less I engaged in the behaviors that she was trying to push me into, the less that it was happening. Now, whether that was, along with that, I got to where I was not instantly defensive at everything that she would say to me.
Yes,
and so it was on both sides of the table. It wasn't just necessarily that I quit reacting in a way that she was looking for, or maybe she wasn't even doing it as much as I may have thought she was doing it. But my reaction and the way that I carried myself and went into the situations and handled myself in the ways that we were communicating changed. And it's all same as anything else that, just like the saying is, be the change that you want to see. If you can stay calm and have adult conversations and have difficult conversations with anybody in a calm, collected manner, and be open-minded enough to hear what they're going to say without cutting them off and talking over them and trying to force them into your opinion, everything runs smoother. But if you're attacking and telling them they're wrong, then you're probably the instigator and you're probably being the problem.
Right. And with your experience in doing the co-parenting journey with others, what is one of the most common threads that you see happening between couples with co-parenting and their children?
I mean, probably the worst trait that's universal on both sides is the double standards.
Oh, tell me about that.
It's I want to know every aspect of your life, but you're not allowed to know anything that's going on in my life. You know what I mean? Like, don't Facebook stalk your ex and then get mad because they're going to do the same to you. Or don't be sitting around talking bad about them around your kids to your friends and then completely come off the handle because your kids said something that they may have said to one of their friends around the kids. You know what I mean? Like, the double standard is typically the worst part of it, because I can do what I want, but you can't. You know what I mean? And and then you run into the, one scenario that tends to come up a lot, and it sort of feeds into the pity party and not letting the relationship go, and the that you hurt my feelings, or I don't want to give up control over you that I used to have, or whatever. But you see it a lot with from my experience, I've noticed it a little bit more from the female side doing it towards the males, but that's not to say that it doesn't go both ways. So in my experience, me and my ex had made a deal very early on that we got first say so. So if it was my weekend or if I had my daughter and something came up, before I called a family member or before I called the babysitter, I would call her to see if she had anything going and wanted to take our daughter. You know what I mean? And vice
Oh,
versa.
okay.
And vice versa. But there was never the deal of, say, if somebody called me and they had an extra concert ticket,
Mm-hmm.
or if she had our daughter and she called me up and said, hey, a couple of my friends are going to go out. They just called unexpected, da 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 da. Do you want Adeline for the night? It was never a deal where I made her feel like crap because
Oh,
she wanted to go out with her friends. And so you see that, you know what I mean? Well, if you don't want your kid this time, then maybe you just won't have them the next weekend either. If you're not going to spend the entire
right.
time that you're scheduled to have them. But I will go out on my weekend and have my parents babysit. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I come across that quite a bit. And that's like the biggest double standard, because just because it's my scheduled weekend or your scheduled weekend or your week or my week or however your scheduling is with your children, if you don't feel like you have to be with them 24/7 when you have them, you can't get mad and hold them as a weapon to keep the other person from having a life with, whether they have kids or
Right.
not. Well, you got to have the open communication though too, because we never did that. I never made her feel like a bad parent because she wanted to have a social life. You know what I mean? But
Right.
she didn't do it to
Right.
me either. And so
Right.
it wasn't a deal where it was, to get to that place is nice, but we had that deal, but there wasn't the backlash guilt on the back end of it. You know what I mean? Coming
Mm.
to where you felt
So there was some
like,
sort of like a mutual understanding between the two of
right.
you,
But you
right?
see it a
Mm-hmm.
lot.
And
You see it a lot where it comes in later, where the wife or the husband will be like, well, then next time, yeah, I'll take them this time, but next time it's your weekend, don't even worry about it if you're not going to spend the whole weekend with them,
mm-hmm.
So like,
Mm-hmm.
even if they did have that deal, a lot of times they still get that passive aggressive backlash, and
Right.
they're having to pay for it for the next 6 months. Like, well, even when they're dropping them off, then you'll start getting those little poke comments. Well, I mean, I'll meet you to drop them off, but are you even going to have them the whole time this weekend? You know what I mean? And then you just get those little jabs, and then that's where the
Mm-hmm.
passive aggressive and the gaslighting, you know what I mean? All those things kind of
Yeah.
come from.
Yeah, because that's almost like also manipulation and control.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get them saying stuff around the kids like, well,
Mm-hmm.
if your dad wanted you, then he wouldn't make plans to, nothing would come up to where he wouldn't want to be with you the whole time you're with him, and this and that. And then then you get that narcissistic and the control, like, I will always be the one here for you, because they may not want you the whole time that they're supposed to have you. And if that's the case, then maybe you just shouldn't go there anymore. And da 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 da. But then that parent's also doing the same things. And so that's the double standard, because they won't call the other parent. They'll just call their mom to come over and watch the kid, and the other parent will not know that the mom went to the bar or the dad went to the bar until the other parent finds out about it, and then it becomes this big mess because they're hiding shit and they're not being honest and they're not communicating, and it just turns into more conflict.
Yes, and I feel like what you said about being passive aggressive co-parenting, just want the audience
Mm-hmm.
to know that that's a good indicator if you are doing those poking the bear and
Mm-hmm.
throwing a comment here and there, um, to really look at yourself and see what needs to be worked on, what needs to be healed within you to stop that. Because like you said, the children start gathering this kind of identity of
Right.
narcissism as well, right?
Right.
So that's the whole point, right? Like before we hit record, you said, if you love your kids, you want to do the
Mm-hmm.
best for them,
Right.
even when you're co-parenting, right? Just because you didn't work out, that's a whole separate issue.
Right. Well, right. If you can't get out of your own hurt feelings or feeling betrayal or anger or grief or trauma, you know what I mean? Then really the kids are the ones that are going to suffer long term, because you're either using the kids as a weapon to, you lost the control because the relationship's over, but now you have your kids. So if they're late on child support, oh well, you don't get to see your kids till you pay me. Or the passive aggressive, well, if you're not going to have them the entire time that you're scheduled to have them, every waking moment, then maybe you just shouldn't have them at all, because you're trying to hurt the other parent. It's got nothing to do, or even on the flip side of the, you see this a little more tendency with the fathers than you do the mothers. But say if it's a newer co-parenting relationship and they have their schedule, then all of a sudden, because the male has lost control of the female, if he's a possessive, controlling type narcissist, then all of a sudden it turns into, well, I have the right to call my kids every night. But he doesn't really want to, it's not really to check on the kids. It's to check on her to see if she's going on a social life, going on dates, if somebody's there, if somebody's babysitting the kids, because he can't control whether or not she's going out with her friends or has a social life anymore. And so that gives him the quote unquote excuse to call and say 2 words to the kid, but then pick a fight with her because, well, why is your mom watching the kids on Friday night? Or you know what I mean? And so then you run into that, using the kids as a way to keep, whatever sliver of control.
Right. It's so true. And it's so common.
Or they keeps their information, you know what I mean? It keeps them informed on what the other person's doing to keep ammo in their, assault to paint them as a bad mother, or keep tabs on what they're doing socially, even knowing it's not really any of their business anymore.
So what does someone do if either one is using those tactics? Because you can't really, right? That is an action that's being done, but you can't really prove it. But that's what's happening, right?
Well, information and keeping the information and keeping the recorded data, you know what I mean? If you're in a high conflict sort of scenario like that, you'd probably want to stick to more texting. And I know that some people are on email basis with their exes and stuff because it's so much conflict. But if you have to get court involvement, you have to get court involvement. And having a parenting plan and having certain stipulations in place, there was one that was in a situation like that where it was like, no, court says you get to call 5 p.m.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You get to call between 5 p.m. and 5:30 on the middle day, because they have 3 days on, 3 days off, the middle day, so that the kids don't have to go longer than 2 days without talking to the other parent. Until you can be an adult, we're sticking to what the court says, and you have this half-hour block to talk to the kids. And as soon as you start wanting to talk to me, I'm allowed to hang up the phone. And so, and it's sad that, but that's you got to protect yourself, and you got to have your boundaries. Like that's
right.
That's, some of them are extreme cases and some of them are just, but if you set the boundaries with anybody, whether it's professional or whether it's romantic or whether it's, your other co-parent, if you set and make them concrete, clear of your boundaries, whether or not you used to be flexible with whatever boundaries you tried to hold, now you're not in that relationship, and you can set those boundaries and be like, this is my boundary. You can call your kids I will have the children call you at 8 a.m. every morning that you don't have them if you would like. But as soon as
Right.
you start trying to talk to me and start poking me or, you know,
Oh, right.
pushing my buttons, the phone call is going to end. And if you decide you're going to text me a whole bunch and harass me, then the police are going to come
Mm,
and talk to you about harassing me. And that's just
mhm.
I mean, you got to protect yourself, because if you don't, then people are going to try to walk all over you, especially when you're dealing with, the narcissistic, the controlling, the
Yes.
mentally emotional, hopefully not physically abusive type personalities. If you don't set those
Mhm.
boundaries, you give them
Mhm.
an inch, they're going to take a mile.
Oh, right. Yeah. See, so that's why I like having these conversations because, like, we said, you don't know what you don't know, but when
Mm-hmm.
we can inform you in
Right.
either way, how, the levity or the extreme situations, but
Right.
this is why I have the podcast to bring out this information because it's so needed, right? Instead of
Right.
going blind and trying to figure out about yourself, there's so much help. We have so much technology and so many coaches, so many people that can help. But the co-parenting journey would be great if we can be responsible within our own emotions because it would just make a healthier environment for the child. And that's what, at
Right.
this point, that's what matters, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
no longer about you and the partner because that dissolved. You guys are separate, but it's really about the child and how do you become in harmony with co-parenting, like holistic, you know,
Right.
uh,
Right.
wholeness co-parenting. This is the whole thing, right? And
Yeah.
it's so important for me for the kids because, mom and dad deserve to be happy again for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason it didn't work out, right?
Right. And you're, like we talked about before, just a few minutes ago, if you're if you can't put the kids first and you're still wrapped up in all of your own stuff and using your kids as weapons or spies, you know what I mean? Think about what they're going to be like when they're adults or
Mm-hmm.
teenagers. You know what I mean?
Right,
I mean,
right.
nobody's setting out to make their kids deceitful or, you know, um, like a like identity crisis, because the kid
Mm-hmm.
has to be one way with the dad and he's got to be one way with the mom, and he's
Mm-hmm.
two completely separate people, and he's got to feel
Right.
shame because the mom he loves his mom, but the mom hates the dad, and vice versa. But he loves them both, but he has to act a certain way with each and kind of act like he doesn't like the mom as much as he loves his mom, and vice versa when he goes to the mom's house, thinking about that towards the dad. And then you're basically
Yeah,
pulling the mental stability of a child two separate ways,
exactly.
and then
So
expecting them to grow
true.
up and be a normal person or be a confident, self-sufficient adult, and it's just not going to be possible.
And I never even thought of that right now, how the mental stability of a child is affected by co-parenting.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
Right.
Right? So we think that we have the answer because we're now separated,
Mm-hmm.
from the spouse or the partner. And it that's not the answer. The answer is like, okay, now how do you resolve
Right.
yourself with co-parenting journey, right?
Right.
So there's so much that, into this. This is like
Right.
huge. This is like a
Right.
big job. So thank you for, doing your part in doing this, kind of work. And like you said, for you, it just fell into place that
Mm-hmm.
you realized that you had this, you know, co-parenting relationship with your ex, that part did work out.
Right. And I'm not going to say in the beginning there wasn't conflict, and
Right.
some of it may have been her. A lot of it was me, because I was in a comfort zone that was surrounded by pain. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And pity, and feel sorry for me, and I mean, here's a great example. She used to. So I've always had my daughter on Wednesdays, and it's just kind of a
Okay.
thing. Breaks up the week, and it's no big deal. And
Okay.
so she would send me a text, midday Wednesday or whatever, like, what time are you going to be into town? What time are you going to pick Adeline up? Da 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 da. And instantly, for a couple of years, I knew the text was coming every Wednesday, but I would still get defensive every time. It would ruin the whole second half of my day. I would get defensive.
Are
And I
you
would
serious?
I would send some snooty comment back, and then she would send one back to me, and it'd ruin the rest of my day, and we'd bicker until I picked her up. Because I would just get defensive. I'd be like, "What?" And I work in construction, so sometimes I get home at 4:30, and sometimes it'd be 5:30 or 6. And it wasn't until like later on that I realized it didn't even have anything to do with me. Because if I got there before 5, then I would take my daughter and we would eat dinner together.
Okay.
And my ex could cook and eat whatever she wanted to.
Right.
But if it was going to be after 5, then she would have to cook something for her and my daughter. And my daughter, obviously is a little kid, so she's kind of a picky eater.
Uh-huh.
And she still does it, to see what time I'm going to be in. But it's more so just to see if she can cook whatever she wants to that night and not have to worry about feeding my daughter, or if she's got to cook something that my daughter will eat.
Right.
And even if I just text her back, I'm like, we're doing this, da 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 today. It's going to be 7:30 by the time I get to town. Like, all she ever says is okay. Like, it doesn't matter what time I'm getting into town. She just wants to know, like, so that she can plan out her afternoon. It's got nothing to do with me.
But it would trigger you that.
It would trigger me. And that was one of the things I had to identify as one of my triggers, because I would instantly get defensive.
Right.
Say, instead of saying like what time I think I'm going to be home, it'd be like, well, I get, it's always in between 4:30 and 5:30. Like, why do you have to ask me this every time? And then she'd be like, why are you being a jerk? And then it would go back and forth.
Right. Oh my God.
Right. And it's just, but it was one of those things, like, it took, I once I identified that it was a trigger of mine, and realized that it really didn't have anything to do with me other than, it just, but it's just things like that,
Right.
If you can't stop and think about them, then you won't correct them or realize,
right.
Because I could still be doing it and act like it's not my fault, and it's not.
Right.
Not me. I'm not the problem. She's the one annoying me while I'm at work.
Right.
With stuff that doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. So that's how the audience can see how that can work. Yeah, that's amazing. So what's a tip you can give to the audience that if they're having some type of conflict, or they're finding themselves even entering into a new co-parenting journey, what would be helpful for them to know?
Well, the 3 biggest ones, and we've kind of talked about all of them, is you got to get over yourself, leave the pity party, let it go, let the relationship go, deal with whatever you got to deal with to move forward. Just like grieving anything that's not coming back.
Right.
Don't engage, find your triggers. If they're poking, don't poke back. The less you react, the less they're going to look for a reaction, or be the person that you want them to be, because they're not going to come at you in a lot of conflict if you're not a confrontational person anymore. And then know what your boundaries are and hold your boundaries. Make sure that they know what the boundaries are, and don't let them cross your boundaries. If you're not okay with them just randomly stopping by your house, then that needs to be a boundary, and do not let them invade your space or cross your boundaries, or take a mile if you're trying to give them an inch.
Right.
But with the boundaries also is the double standard.
Right.
If you don't want them calling around, driving by your house, don't be doing it to them. Don't send your friends or family members by their house to see if there's another car in their driveway if you don't want them doing it to you. If it's your weekend with the kids and you think they're going to the bar, if it's okay for you to go to the bar when you don't have your kids, it's okay for them to. You have no right to call them up and start bad mouthing them or calling them names, or trying to figure out what they're doing when they have their own social time without the kids. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Yes. Thank you so much. So where can our audience find you online, or where are you? Where do you hang out?
Instagram mostly. If somebody has any questions or has any certain scenarios that maybe they would like help with, or even just shoot me a message and get some advice.
Yeah.
Instagram's the best place.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm so grateful to have your journey and expertise on the podcast, because this is something that should be very well talked about and should be common out there and not hidden, because it's really needed for the health, stability, mental stability for the children.
Right.
That's what's first and
The most
foremost for
important
me.
part. Yeah. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much. And thank you for the tips. And I hope that whoever resonates with in the audience listening to this reaches out to you, because this is definitely a golden opportunity to rise above from personal pain into, powerful co-parenting.
Exactly. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Neutralize the Mama Trauma podcast. If you haven't already, please hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss any new episodes. It would also mean the world to me if you're able to take a moment and rate and review my podcast on how it was helpful to you. Also, please connect with me on my social media platforms. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the next episode.